Take me out to the ball game. Soon we'll be doing just that. Good afternoon and welcome to the Akron Roundtable. I'm Angelina Milo, Board Chair and President of the Akron Roundtable Board of Directors. We're delighted that so many of you are able to join us today for this virtual forum. And we sincerely thank the Akron Summit County Public Library for continuing to host our virtual events. We also sincerely thank WKSU 89.7 FM. WKSU will rebroadcast today's program on Thursday, March 25th at 8 p.m. I would also like to thank our board members. I'm very fortunate to serve alongside such an outstanding group of community leaders whom are dedicated to the Akron Roundtable mission. A list of our board members can be found on our website. Please mark your calendars now for our next event, Thursday, April 15th, when Dr. Jeff Reuter explains the importance of Lake Erie and our water system on the environment. You can read more about our upcoming speakers and our podcast by going to our website at akronroundtable.org. And speaking of marking your calendars, don't forget to mark your calendars for Monday, April 5th, so you don't miss the Cleveland Indians opening day. Are they still our Cleveland Indians? Perhaps we'll find out today. And in that regard, it is with our privilege today to welcome to the Akron Roundtable stage, Mr. Paul Dolan, owner of our beloved Cleveland Indians. Today's program is generously sponsored by KeyBank. We're very grateful for the generous support Akron Roundtable receives from sponsors, patrons, and subscribers. Please visit our website if you would like to make a contribution. We thank you for your support. During today's event, we'll be using Asker technology. Asker technology enables you to submit questions via mobile devices. Questions may be submitted at any time during our program and will be forwarded for review during the Q&A portion. Watch the screen for instructions should you need them. Today's speaker will be introduced by a fellow Akron Roundtable board member, Mr. Barry Dunaway, President of Leadership Akron. Ms. Amanda Rabinowitz with WKSU will serve as moderator of today's presentation. Following that moderated discussion, Mr. Dolan has generously agreed to take questions from the audience. Ms. Rabinowitz will also coordinate that portion of the program. And now it is my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Barry Dunaway. Barry, are we ready to play ball?
We are indeed, Angelina. Thanks so much for the introduction. And it is truly my honor to welcome and ask Paul Dolan to join us at the Akron Roundtable this afternoon. Paul is the owner, chairman, and chief executive officer of the Cleveland Indians. And Paul has held that role as chairman and chief executive officer since 2011. The Dolan family's ownership of the Cleveland Indians enters its 22nd season in 2021, and Paul begins his 9th season as the primary control person of the franchise. Paul began as vice president, general counsel of the Indians upon joining the organization in 2000, and later served as the club's president from 2004 to 2010. Paul was born in Chardon, Ohio, and graduated with a BA degree from St. Lawrence University and went on to earn his Juris Doctorate from the University of Notre Dame's Law School. Paul is involved in various business interests throughout Northeast Ohio, including being on the board of the J.M. Smucker Company, which is where I had the privilege of getting to know Paul. And he is engaged in serving with many philanthropic and civic boards throughout Northeast Ohio. He's currently serving as chairman of the United Way of Greater Cleveland and is a board member for the Cleveland Clinic, Greater Cleveland Partnership, Playhouse Square Foundation, Unify Labs, and Evergreen Corporation. Paul is a very active athlete himself and has been the co-chairman for the Velasano Bike to Cure in each of their events, 2014 through 2019, and also races as an Indians team member. Paul and his wife Karen reside in Geauga County and have 2 grown sons. I know, Paul, you're joining us from Goodyear, Arizona, sunny Goodyear, Arizona, where spring training is taking place. So clearly an Akron connection with the Goodyear name. And of course, Akron is the home of the Akron Rubber Ducks, the Indians AA affiliate team. So a lot of connections with Akron, and certainly a lot of fans here of the Indians in Greater Akron. Leading our conversation with Paul this afternoon will be Amanda Rabinowitz. There's no better person to lead this conversation. Amanda is a reporter with WKSU, and I'm sure many of you have heard her weekly conversations with Terry Pluto, where they talk all things sports in Northeast Ohio. So Amanda, I'm gonna hand it over to you. And Paul, again, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. It's greatly appreciated.
Thanks, Barry. Although it's morning here, I'm glad to be with you still.
Yeah, Barry, thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you, Paul Dolan, for being with us today and allowing us to ask you some questions and hear from all of the fans in the Akron area and beyond who want to get to know a little bit more about you and the team and all of the important things that are going on. So thank you so much for being here.
I'm really glad to be here and glad to do this and get a chance to interact with the Akron community.
You know, the Dolan family has owned the Cleveland Indians going on 22 years now. Can you reflect a little bit, just to start, about, you know, these last 22 years and team ownership, and, you know, why has this been so special to you, and to keep it going for this long? You know, what is it about this that you love so much?
You know, Bobby DiBiasio, our longtime PR, I don't know what his title is now, but he's been a PR guy for a long time, said to me a couple of years ago that this season, your family will become the longest tenured owners of the franchise in the history of the franchise, which is something we really hadn't been paying attention to, didn't know. And there was no parade, by the way, when we got to that title. But it really kind of amazed me, and still amazes me, to hear 22 seasons, because it seems like it just been a blink of an eye. But it's really been an extraordinary experience for us. You know, I think I'm fifth or sixth generation Clevelander. I lose track. And we were raised with the team. And while, like most kids, I dreamed of being the shortstop for the Cleveland Indians, it never dawned on me that we might someday own the team. And it's really been a love affair for 20 some years. It's not easy. The baseball economics are a challenge, but it's something that we've embraced, and it's really enriched our lives, and particularly me, because I'm the family member who's been most engaged. You know, Barry listed off some of the things that I am able to do in the community, and I consider those a privilege to be able to do that. And I do that because I have the platform of the team, and I don't regret any of it.
Well, the team has been on a remarkable run in recent years: 8 consecutive winning seasons, 5 trips to the playoffs, World Series berth, best regular season record in the American League during that span. What do you attribute to the success of this team in these last 8 years?
You took all my lines there. I was going to use all that information. We have a phenomenal organization. We have led by Chris Antonetti and Mike Chernoff. We've got the people who made the right decisions in terms of bringing on people who develop our players. Their focus has been right. Luck's played some role in it, but we've also, I think we'll probably talk about payroll at some point in time, but payroll is only part of building an organization. And we've invested in areas that maybe aren't as visible to the fans. Starting with Chris and Mike. I mean, Mike is our number 2 baseball guy. He would be number 1 virtually anywhere else in the country. But we've invested in him, and he's invested in us. We invest in technology. We invest in various forms of development that contribute to the success of the organization. It's not, doesn't last forever, but 8 years of winning is extraordinary for a small market team like ours.
Yeah, and one of the main components of that on the field during that span has been Francisco Lindor. And I know I speak for fans when it's hard to see a player like that go, even though I know many fans were expecting it. From an owner perspective, how difficult is it to see a player like that and to have to trade him?
Yeah, no, that's particularly painful, because I mean, my wife refers to him as her third son. We have two boys, but in her mind, she has a third, and we just traded him to New York, because he's not only a fabulous player, but he's somebody that was really integral to our clubhouse culture and to our team, and we just a wonderful person. And so it was more difficult than most to make that trade. But it's the reality of a small market team, particularly a small market team that wants to compete, which seems what's the word I want to use? Not paradox, but he's a phenomenal player, and you want to have phenomenal players on your team, but you can't have just one. You've got to build a team. So we could afford a player like Lindor. We just couldn't afford to put a team around him, and that's our reality. And so we had to find that we tried to keep him on our terms, but very understandably from his perspective, his value is shaped by what the large markets teams are willing to pay, and that was far in excess of what we could do. So the best thing for us to do is trade him at a time when we can extract some value. And we think we did in the form of four players that we got from the Mets, who some will be part of this year's team, and some will be part of the team in 4 or 5 years from now. And that's way to maybe to go back to answer your earlier question. How do we remain successful is by be willing to make some of these very hard decisions and painful ones, but they kind of keep the pipeline full for us so that we don't have long stretches. I mean, we're going to have losing seasons. 8 seasons in a row is great. We're going to have a losing season, whether it's this year or not. I hope not, and maybe we can avoid it. But the real goal is not to have a long stretch of losing. That we always have on a horizon a championship team in our works, and I think we're at that spot now.
You mentioned that Cleveland, being a smaller market team, with the current labor agreement set to expire this year, I know negotiations are going to be contentious. Do you think there will be actually any movement on helping to make smaller market teams like Cleveland more competitive in this league?
I hope so. But baseball has this burden, I guess, of a very difficult labor relationship, we also have the issue of small market, large markets. So it's sort of a tripartite discussion. And there are things that can be done, that some of which is already in place. Like we get a few extra draft picks. That helps. I mean, Tristan McKenzie is a product of that. So more maneuvers like that maybe don't involve are necessarily financial upfront, but allow us to be competitive would help. But it's going to be a very difficult labor negotiation up ahead, because the union has a different view of things, and some other markets have different views of things. So I don't know. I'm not sure what's going to come out of this CBA.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the payroll. I know it's been slashed by around $100 million since 2017. Reflect on this last year of the pandemic and just how much it's really hurt this team and the bottom line. Can you just kind of give us some perspective?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the payroll part of it. Yeah, I think our payroll high was in 2017, and we measure it by different things, but it was generally 140 something was what it was. That was well beyond what the market would sustain. Another way of saying we lost a lot of money, multiple 8 figures. And that was purposeful, though. We were hopeful maybe that the market would respond a little better than did in terms of attendance, but it is what it is on that front, and we went into that with eyes wide open. But we can't sustain that, and so in the coming years, while we were still in a championship mode, we put up payrolls that were still well beyond what our revenues would support. But again, that wasn't sustainable. So you saw us started to peel it down. And frankly, going into the 2020 season, absent COVID, the pandemic, we were budgeting still about a small 8-figure loss. So we were still not done in terms of getting back to normal. but we were starting to get into range of what was comfortable for us until the next World Series situation. Then COVID hit, and that hit everybody very, very hard, obviously. And so coming into this season, our payroll reflects not just that our trying to get back to normal, but recognition of the fact that we got hit really, really hard with COVID, and we have so much uncertainty about this year, and we have so much uncertainty about next year because of the labor situation you just mentioned. We were lucky, frankly, maybe not so much lucky because some of it's by design. We had the flexibility to actually take our payroll down and still have a competitive team. And that is a position that few clubs actually found themselves in. They either were locked into contracts that they couldn't get rid of, and so we're not able to, so they're going to suffer significant losses. We've positioned ourselves where, with a little luck, maybe we won't suffer losses this year. And that's really, really important to the long-term health of the franchise. My hope is that, that by Memorial Day even, we're back to some semblance of normal. And so we do well this year, and going forward, then we can take our payroll back up to what we think should be a more sustainable rate.
What would you say is the toughest issue that you're facing as an owner right now?
Oh, we've touched on it. I mean, there's some immediate issues that are very strong personal, which my guess is you'll raise that I won't be able to talk about, but and those are very difficult for us. But long term, the labor situation and the economics of the game are the significant challenge that we have.
How do you handle the criticism that you face from fans who just say, hey, spend more money? Why not?
Yeah, because I understand it. I mean, why wouldn't they? Particularly when you look at every other league has an economic framework that makes it possible for the teams to be competitive on a regular basis, or at least have a chance. And whether they're competitive or not really is up to their own devices, but and to keep maybe some of the more popular players. I mean, LeBron James was from Akron, was in Cleveland for a long period of time. That doesn't happen in the Major League Baseball economic system. In football, if you get a good quarterback, you can keep them. We can't do that, and we can't necessarily do that in baseball. And that's our biggest challenge.
Yeah. When you talk about ownership, John Sherman became a minority owner in 2016. There was talk he was eventually going to buy the team. And then, of course, the Kansas City Royals came on the market, so he bought them. Are you still looking for minority owner and or potential buyers?
Yeah, John has to sell his interest. So he's out in the marketplace. And yeah, we are. I mean, we're not in any hurry, but we have talked to people about their interest in buying a little more of the team from us. We are unique. We're really, really unique, particularly before the Sherman deal. To own 100% of the team is pretty unique in baseball. And then to own 100% of the team without having, there's no other business in our family. This is it. And it doesn't throw off cash. So, because we lose money every year, or most years. So it's, go back to what we talked about before. It's been somewhat a labor of love for us. But after 20 some years, there's some desire to maybe lift the burden a little bit and realize some of the gains that have happened. So we're out in the marketplace talking to people. Again, we're not in any hurry. And this is about selling minority interests. And we'll see.
Okay. I just want to remind folks who are joining us for this forum, you can submit your questions for Paul via the Akron Roundtable's Asker online app. It's at asker.io/Akron Roundtable. So get those questions in that we'll get to here in a bit. I've been hearing from many fans who are starting to wonder about the future of the team because of Progressive Field's lease being up in 2023. Where do negotiations on the extension of the stadium stand?
I'll just say on that we are in negotiations, and we have every intent to extend our lease and secure the team's presence in Northeastern Ohio for the foreseeable future.
Okay. I do want to give you the chance to comment on the Mickey Callaway situation and the allegations of sexual harassment that stem from the former pitching coach. The Athletic published an article saying that Cleveland's front office was well aware of his behavior. What's your response? What do you say to that? And did you know about it?
That's one of those areas that when you ask me what the tough ones are, that is a particularly tough one because we really take pride in the culture that we have in our organization, and we still do, by the way. But I'm not in a position to comment on that right now because Major League Baseball right now is conducting an investigation. And until they complete that investigation, which we hope will be soon, it's really not appropriate for me or anyone else to make public comments about that.
Well, then let's move on to the name change. The team announced it would keep the Indians name this season, expecting likely a change in 2022. Can you update us on the timeline of where things stand with that?
Well, on that I can say that remains the timeline, but just to be clear, we said no sooner than 2022, and our target is still 2022, but it's a difficult process. Trying to find a name that works, that we can clear, and then ultimately activate in a tight time frame. And by tight, I mean we can't just show up in spring training and say, here's the new name. We've got to have it buttoned up long before that. So it'll be sometime middle of this year, whether we've got it down where we can do it for 2022. And if not, we'd have to push it to 2023. We're working hard to get it done by then, but there's just no certainty on that.
What exactly goes into something like that? Can you kind of just elaborate a little bit on I know it's a very long process. What goes into a decision like this for a team?
Well, it's identifying names that we think work. When in that context, we're talking to a lot of different people, including our fans. But the real challenge is finding a name that works that we can use. There aren't many words in the English language today that somebody doesn't own in some shape or form. And particularly in the sports realm, that's a real challenge. So we have to navigate that, and that invariably involves discussions. The outcome of those discussions may very well dictate what direction we go.
I know a couple years ago, you were really in favor of dropping the Chief Wahoo logo, but you did say, the Indians name is going to stay. How has this evolved for you?
Yeah, I did say that. I said it many times, privately and publicly, and I believed it. We can take up all our time on this, but I'm happy to walk you through it and maybe at a high level. Absolutely, Chief Wahoo was something when we bought the team 20 some years ago. I knew that was going to be an issue we would have to deal with at some point in time. We certainly took our time in dealing with it, but we ultimately dealt with it. And at the time we dealt with it, I said publicly and privately that the name Indians was not going to change. And I meant it. That didn't mean I didn't know there weren't problems with it. But frankly, I put on blinders to it. And those blinders came off this year or last year in the wake of the George Floyd killing, where we had to, we, like so many other corporate entities, said that, we rejected what was happened there, and we were recommitting to our role in the community, particularly our roles around social justice, racial equity, which we think are important, which begs the question, how do we do that with a name that is a major problem for many in our community? And that started us on a journey where we talked to Native American representatives, individuals, local groups, national groups, academic groups. We talked to various other non-Native American organizations throughout Northeastern Ohio who represented other communities. And from that process, we recognized that this was a name that we really could not use. we felt it was the right thing to discontinue the use. Frankly, we also thought it was a smart thing to do, because the reality is that the issues around the name are not going to go away. And I don't think it's our role as a sports team representing a community to be in the midst of a culture war. That we need to unite people. And we felt that the arguments against the use of the name were certainly reasonable. People could rationally disagree, but the arguments about getting rid of it are reasonable, and that it's not just a few people, it's a lot of people in our community who are adamantly against the use of that name. And that's just not a position that a sports franchise should be in. It doesn't serve the community well, and frankly, it doesn't serve us very well either, because the pressure on our sponsors, the inability to use the name. I mean, we tiptoe around the use of our name. So our goal is to find a name that we can all unite around. It may take time for some, but I think we'll get there. And when we get there, it'll be a name that everybody can feel comfortable and own. And frankly, we can use in a more aggressive and active way than we currently use our marks and name.
Why not just go the route of the Washington Football Club, who just dropped it all together until they find a name? Why keep it for this year?
Couple of reasons. One, I didn't like it, and a lot of people, some people did like the idea of the baseball club. Others did not. I don't like it. It's a generic sounding name to me. Frankly, it's difficult to transition from one name to another than to another name. It's difficult not just for us, but for our sponsors and everybody involved in the organization. And I think one of the benefits of doing it the way we did is by talking to the various Native American groups. We forged a relationship and hopefully built some trust that they know we're going to get there, and we're going to do it right. So we're taking our time to do it right, yet we're going to get there as soon as possible.
I don't know if you're going to comment, but any front runners of names that you like?
Yeah, no comment.
Okay, figured I'd ask.
But lots of names have been suggested, but I'll hold off on commenting.
Terry Francona, he's just become, fans here love him, and he's been going through some pretty serious health issues. What's the plan? With not only making a commitment to staying with Terry Francona, but also should there have to be a replacement?
Well, let me start with him. Is hopefully his health is good this year, but you're right. He's had some challenges, and we work with him as much as possible to make sure that he's comfortable and doing the right thing for himself. And because sometimes you have to kind of roll him back a little bit, because he'll work himself to the point where he jeopardizes his health otherwise. I think he's with us until he's no longer managing. I mean, he's under contract for, I don't know, a couple more years, but I feel like that we're now in that situation where he's going to be here until he decides not to manage. And I hope that's a long way off. If we have to transition at some point in time, we'll do that. But there's no particular plan to replace him. Sandy did a nice job last year replacing him. That certainly wasn't planned. But when it came about, Sandy stepped in and did his job. And I suspect if something happens this season, we'll see DeMarlo Hell's joined us as a bench coach. And I don't know what the plan would be in terms of an interim in the event we're in that situation. Our strong hope is that that's not going to be necessary. And then we'll see.
Okay. Just a reminder, if you have a question for Paul, go to asker.io/Akron Roundtable so you can submit a question for him. I want to talk a little bit about the minor leagues. Barry Dunaway in his introduction mentioned the Akron Rubber Ducks, of course. And, these minor leagues, especially for a team like Cleveland, are so important in developing players and keeping that talent going. And having an entire season wiped out for the minors and, uncertain when, the season's scheduled to start in May, not sure that's going to happen on schedule. how much does that hurt a team losing a whole year of the minors like that?
It does a lot. First, I should point out that the Rubber Ducks is a new name. Akron has gone through the name change situation, and it seems to have gone very, very well. So I hope that we can replicate what seems to have successfully happened in Akron. Losing a minor league season is very difficult for the minor league team owners, certainly. But it's also very, very difficult for the Major League Baseball teams, and maybe even uniquely for us. Not sure many other teams experience the same. We have a very young team and a young system. In fact, we have one of the best farm systems in baseball right now. And it's what's particularly exciting about it is it's rated as so strong, although most of the players are really young, really deep in the system. And for them to progress, they have to play. And so losing that year of performance may or may not, change their timeline to the major leagues, but certainly gives us less information because we don't see how they're developing. It also affects us right at the major league club. I mean, we've got a lot of outfielders on this team, many of whom have not had a chance to play because of last season, and we got to get answers. Does the Luplow, Johnson, Zimmer, and go on? Are they going to be major league players? We got to find out. And if we had a full AAA season last year, we would have been in a better position to know what we've got with those guys. So it really was disruptive for us in terms of understanding what we have in our system or understanding what other people have. Like, when we made the Lindor trade, Lindor Carrasco trade, we didn't know as much about the two young guys that were deep in the Met system because they hadn't played yet. Or relying upon some somewhat older data. That's not unique to us. That's what everybody had to go through.
Yeah, how much does the realignment of the minor leagues, hurt or affect you in terms of, losing the Mahoning Valley Scrappers and kind of the whole realignment of the whole system?
We actually think that's a more rational system that will allow us actually have a better handle on our players. One, we'll be able to develop them better. By shrinking the size of the minor leagues, particularly the number of players, we're going to pay the players more. And we're going to be able to pour more resources into them, both by positioning some of them. It didn't make a whole lot of sense to draft a kid out of college, particularly from one of the elite programs where the facilities are fantastic, and then send them to a short season where they get on a bus and travel 12 hours, and the facilities aren't up to the level what they knew in college, much less what we expect. So we'll be sending a lot of our youngest guys to Goodyear, where I'm at right now, where we do have state-of-the-art facilities, where we can develop players, where their diet and their workouts can be developed better, can be monitored better and set and established on a stronger basis. So it's a better development path for our players, the new system, as opposed to the way we used to do it, which we did it for so many years because that's the way we did it. It never really made sense. So this is the beginning of starting to rationalize how our development system actually works.
With the pandemic last year, no fans in the stands, they're going to be welcoming fans back. How do you re-engage the fan base that, had to watch on TV last season, kind of got used to that, and, the team's entirely different this season. How do you re-engage fans for this upcoming season?
I mean, I hope by having an exciting, interesting baseball team and the opportunity to come out and I think most people are chomping at the bit to get out and to socialize and to get into those gatherings. So that hopefully will be a big part of it. But we also, we have to learn different ways to connect to fans, and not the way you'd want to do it, but having a year with the pandemic, we learned different ways to do that using social media and other video platforms. Zoom, what we're doing right here, was as a way to connect with our fans. They got to know our players in different sort of ways. I mean, like Tristan McKenzie, who may be one of our future stars, came up last year, and we were able to connect him with fans and with various charities around the community through Zoom. So we have more tools than we used to have. We learned some things over the course of the year that may come into play, but I hope ultimately the draw is tried and true baseball, the nice weather and coming down to the ballpark and watching baseball.
For some fans who may not be familiar with some of the new faces and names, are there any that you're particularly excited about and think are really going to be something that we should be paying attention to now?
Well, I'm not the guy to make those kind of assessments.
Yeah.
But I am looking forward to watching I may mispronounce the name, Jimenez, the shortstop we got, one of the shortstops. We have lots of shortstops in our organization, but this guy we just picked up from the Mets, who's looked really good in camp, swings the bat in a way that I appreciate. And I think it's going to be fun to watch him.
I think back to the 2016 season and the World Series run. When the team's up 3-1 and you don't win that World Series, as an owner, what's going through your mind at that moment and looking ahead to the future and then where you are now?
No, obvious disappointment, but I'll admit that wasn't as painful. I'll compare it to another moment in time in a second. We got to the 7th game of the World Series. We got into extra innings in the 7th game. You can't deliver much more than that. So I'll admit to, yes, disappointment, but feeling really good about what we did. The real pain came a year later, being up 2-0 on the Yankees and losing that, because that was a 102 win team. That was arguably the best team in baseball. And I know it's odd because we, 3-1 in the World Series, you got to win it, but it almost feels like 17 is the one that got away from us more so than 16.
Interesting. What are the expectations for this season? What are you hoping this team can accomplish?
I'll certainly acknowledge up front that this is not a team anybody's picking to win the World Series, and I don't know if anybody's picking us to win the division either. But nobody should fall asleep on this team either. We're bringing back the reigning Cy Young Award winner, the reigning runner-up to the American League MVP, arguably the best catcher in baseball, and some solid veterans in Hernandez and Rosario, who we brought in from the Twins. And then we've got a young pitching staff that has shown promise, and we have some young position players who have not yet shown that promise, but may have it in them. So a lot of it will depend upon what those younger guys can do, assuming that the more established guys play to form. And if they do, we can compete at the highest levels.
I think we're sort of in the downward part of our cycle, and yet we're still fielding a competitive team, and we can look forward and see a championship core developing it in our system that, maybe a couple years away. And when they're a couple years away, you don't really know, but it's the kind of thing where we feel like we're in a good position to sustain our competitive run and potentially field a championship caliber team in the relatively near future.
Okay. I'm going to open it up to questions now. And you feel free to continue to submit them. They are at asker.io/Akron Roundtable. You kind of touched on this about John Sherman and having a minority owner, but what are the benefits of having a minority owner?
Well, frankly, the biggest is simply that, we took a little money off the table. That's really, that's the biggest one. We owned 100 at the time. We owned 100% of the team, and again, as I've said, literally we've no distributions whatsoever over the course of 20. Well, at the time we sold to John, it was probably more like 16, 17 years. So that was just sort of a personal stake. But beyond that, I did actually enjoy. John and I developed a nice partnership and friendship, and it's kind of nice to have, as much as you trust and rely upon people in your office, it's nice to have somebody who's in the exact same spot, that they have money in the game, and they're an owner. You are.
Yeah, and I guess related to that, somebody wants to know, LeBron James, he's become a minority owner of the Boston Red Sox. Any discussion for LeBron James to become minority owner of the Indians?
Well, no, that hasn't happened. We would certainly welcome that, but I think that was more of a function. LeBron's had a relationship with the Fenway Sports Group for a while, and my sense is that was sort of an internal restructuring of some kind.
So when it comes to Terry Francona, you talked a little bit about him, and you mentioned that if needed to be, someone would fill those shoes. Would that be Sandy Alomar Jr.?
Yeah, no, I can't comment on that. I mean, obviously did a nice job last year. My gut tells me it would probably depend upon whether it's a temporary or more permanent thing. The process, not the result might not be different, but the process would be different.
You know, and when it comes to somebody like Sandy Alomar Jr. and Terry Francona and, you know, Chris Antonetti, how have you been able to keep this core group together for so long?
Yeah,
They all had chances to leave.
yeah, absolutely. I get calls all the time on them. But I think that's our secret sauce, and I'm not quite sure how it happens, but we seem to have a culture here that they appreciate, and maybe they enjoy the community as well, and like the challenge, and it's certainly a challenge. Their jobs are very difficult, functioning and competing with a smaller market team, but they seem to thrive with that.
Mm. We have a question about the club's relationship with the Akron Rubber Ducks. This is the Akron Roundtable. I'm sure we have a lot of Akron folks here who love their Rubber Ducks. So what is the relationship between the Indians and the Rubber Ducks?
I mean, technically, or just, I mean, it's a very strong, I mean, Ken Babby is somebody I know well and like, and I think he's well liked by our organization. And so we greatly appreciate how they run the franchise. And that's important to us. I mean, not so much what happens in the stands, but on the field. I mean, how the facilities are cared for, because going back to earlier discussion about developing our players, that's what this is all about. And for us, that means the facilities have to be high quality, playing field, locker rooms, workout facilities, food, that kind of stuff. And Ken does a great job there. And that's extraordinarily important to us. But he also runs a great franchise beyond that. And Rubber Ducks is a great name, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, really, it is great. I mean, it reflects Akron.
Yeah.
Fun.
Yeah.
So it's really a tremendous job he did there.
Do you have any Rubber Ducks apparel?
I'm sure somewhere somewhere in there's a Rubber Duck hat or something like that.
I'm sure if somebody's listening, they can hook you up with some
Yeah.
with some Rubber Ducks apparel. I really kind of think this question's interesting. In terms of getting rid of Indians merchandise when it comes that time, is there an environmentally friendly approach to how you will, I guess, phase all that stuff out?
Well, I mean, we're not going to throw it away. Well, I mean, we already have an understanding with the Native American groups that with respect to Chief Wahoo, we will continue to sell Chief Wahoo in a very limited way. But any of our profits from those sales will go to some cause that I'm not sure we've agreed on it, just what it will be, but it'll serve the Native American community. With the Indians, I mean, the important part of our relationship here is that we're not walking away from our 105, 100, 600, however many years it will end up being, history as the Indians. That is who we were and will continue to be. And to that extent, we'll sell merchandise reflecting that. So we're not taking up trucks and throwing away all of that stuff. Now, it'll naturally fade away to a very limited amount, as we hope, as our new name becomes our brand, and people bond around that. Like, you don't see us selling too much Naps or Broncos or Blues wear at the book, but I'm sure we have something somewhere, as at least vintage merchandise, and that's what ultimately Indians will be, is some sort of vintage legacy wear.
Okay. As a team owner, I'm sure you probably talk to other team owners, and somebody has a question here about other team names: the Atlanta Braves, the Kansas City Chiefs, Chicago Blackhawks. Do you feel like there's equal pressure on all of these other teams with controversial names to change them?
There may end up being, but what we learned in this process was that putting aside the range of offensiveness, if you want to use that term, that our name versus the other names generates. More important, what we learned is there are there are 574 federally registered Native American tribes in North America. And when we talk to some of the national groups, they might say to us that we don't like any of these names. They really don't like the Native American imagery used for sports nicknames. But they also have a policy of respecting the sovereignty of individual tribes. So when the Atlanta Braves have a relationship with the Eastern Cherokee Nation, that's very deep and extensive, and is the foundation of their continued use of the name Braves. They may not like it, they meaning some of these national groups, but they respect the sovereignty of that group to enter into those deals. And so they're not going to, maybe not going to engage on the same level they would engage with Cleveland, because here we have no federally registered tribes. We have no relationship with any Native group that would suggest they're okay with our continued use of the name. So we're in Kansas City Chiefs have a relationship with the 6 tribes around in Missouri. And by the way, Chief is named after the former mayor of Kansas City and not a native name, although they've certainly activated with a Native American look. So I'm not sure that's their defense, but it's interesting history to it. I think the Blackhawks had some sort of arrangement. You think of Florida State and the Seminoles, they have an arrangement with the Seminole tribe. So, I mean, whether those will hold up over time or not, I don't know. But we were clearly in a different position because we didn't have that kind of relationship with any kind of local, or I would call it an authentic relationship with any kind of local tribe.
Okay. Somebody wants to know, what's the sweet spot for revenue for the club to be profitable?
Well, that's kind of hard to calculate because, I mean, I guess, but I can kind of give an answer. It's a range, but assuming normal attendance patterns in the 80 to 90 million is where our break even typically is.
Okay. For fans coming back to games this season, what can they expect? Capacity, masks, food vendors?
Yeah. 30. Well, we're going to open up the season with 30% capacity. That's by edict from the state, and that means that we'll be spread out throughout the ballpark. It won't. I mean, 30% is a little over 11,000, somewhere between 11 and 12,000, which in April is fairly normal, but they're all concentrated in the lower bowl around home plate, and it looks sort of packed. Then this will look a little different because they'll be dispersed around the ballpark. Everyone will be required to wear masks except when they're eating. And there'll be some other restrictions on activity, but otherwise it'll be going to a baseball game.
Okay. Somebody has a question here about Shane Bieber. And, you get a Cy Young winner, as the Cleveland is known to bring up these Cy Young winners, and then we know what happens after that. So somebody wants to know, are we past the point where Shane Bieber can be signed to an affordable long-term deal?
We're definitely not past that point. We're practically right in that period of time when typically those deals happen, if they're going to happen. And we'll see. I mean, that's I'm not going to comment on any discussions, but it requires both sides to get a deal done.
And I like this question too. You mentioned building a culture of the team. How would you describe that team culture?
Well, when you say team, I really mean organization. I think we have an organization that's built on trust and collaboration, that people can. I mean, I think, well, this sort of incorporates the team too. I mean, one of the great images I have is Tito Francona, our 60-some-year-old sort of old school manager, going into our offices and going up to the 4th floor where our baseball analytics people are housed, and walking to the office of Sky Anderchek, who probably never played baseball well, he probably played baseball, but certainly never at a competitive level. But he was our lead analytics guy, and talking through, how do we do these things? It's the willingness to let everybody in the organization engage, have a viewpoint, and be valued. I think that seems to resonate well and builds a strong culture.
What's your favorite part about owning a team? You mentioned the challenges, what your biggest challenges is. What's your favorite part of all of this?
Oh gosh, there's so many, but I guess what doesn't grow old for me is when I have the ability, or at least, well, I used to, under the pandemic I don't, but I'll get it back, I hope soon, to come down on the field right before the game. And oftentimes I'll take somebody, and particularly if it's somebody with young kids who appreciate the game, the wide-eyed look on people when they get down on the field right before a game, it's just sort of a thrill for them, and it's a thrill for me that just never ends. And that's kind of fun to do.
Do you get a chance to attend a lot of games?
I do. I have a chance to attend a lot of games, yes,
I mean,
I do.
you have the opportunity, I know, but do you get there to many?
Yeah. I probably go to 2/3 of the home games, and then I'll choose a road weekend, maybe a couple a year, travel somewhere to see the games on the road. But so I probably, on total, I probably get to half the games, meaning I don't go to that many road games.
And I guess this last question, I got through all the audience questions, but where's this club going in the next couple of years? You mentioned, getting it back to the World Series is the goal. How long do you envision that'll take? What's the process?
Well, you're right. Getting the World Series is always our goal. So what is it, March 18th? So is it 6 months away we'll get there, 7 months away? I mean, that's the way you have to think. And it's certainly I say this seriously, it's a possibility this year. I mean, if we could go back in time to 5 years ago to the spring training in 2016, probably weren't that many people thinking we were going to the World Series that year. So we have a team that could go there this year, but there are sometimes you're in better position to do it than other years. And we think that we have a team, we have the foundation for a team that's coming that could have that kind of talent, where we would again be one of the favorites to be a World Series contender. And I mean, a couple of years, it's hard to know. That doesn't mean we're not going to compete and contend this year and in the next couple of years. It depends largely on the development of some of the young players that we have at the top level now. We just feel also very good about the influx of talent at the lower levels of minors.
Paul Dolan, is there anything else that you want to say or talk about?
No, not particularly, other than I'm glad that 2020 is over, and I hope that 2021 is much better for everyone. And I look forward. I mean, going to a baseball game when there are no fans in the stands is really not a very fun experience. And we've learned that the value of having fans in the stands. The players perform better. I think they get the energy from the fans, and the whole experience is so much better when you have fans in the stands. So we are all very excited at the prospect to return to normal. We'll start at 30% and we'll grow from there. And I certainly hope by midsummer, I'll be surrounded by 30,000 of my closest friends watching baseball.
I hope so too. Paul Dolan, thank you so much for taking the time, getting up so early in Goodyear, Arizona, and joining us. I know all of the Akron community here really appreciates your time and your candid responses to all the questions. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it. Thank you, Amanda.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Dolan, we can't thank you enough for joining us today. And on behalf of the Akron Roundtable, it'll be my pleasure to actually send to you a contemplative sun as a memento of your time with us this afternoon. And this contemplative sun was actually designed exclusively for Akron Roundtable by our local artist, Don Drum, who I'm sure is as big of his Indians fan as all our attendees here today. Thank you again. We truly appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again at our April virtual forum. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.